Einkorn bread, soft and tender crumb with a crispy crust. Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm going to show you how to make that scrumptious loaf of bread you just saw. Now, if you searched YouTube to find this video, you probably already know all about einkorn flour. And my guess is you're probably just as frustrated as I was trying to figure out how to make this stuff work. If you're not familiar with einkorn flour, then stop right now, open up your browser, and Google einkorn flour, E-I-N-K-O-R-N. Because until you understand all the nutritional value and the health benefits that you get from this flour, you're never going to understand why we go through all this nonsense to make it work. So rule number one is forget everything you already know about bread making. And, well, that's all the rules I got. You see, the problem is we're trying to make a modern day artisan loaf out of an ancient grain. When you think about it, bread 5,000 years ago looked more like a cow pie than anything else. So we're trying to do the impossible. That's why I started my video at the end, so you could see right up front where we were going with this and know that it would be worth your while to watch it. So if you're still with me, then let's get started. I'm showing you the recipe in 3 different units of measure, and you can come back here and copy it down later. We're going to start with a pre-ferment. A pre-ferment is just a cheater's way of making a sourdough base. Even though einkorn flour would work fine with a sourdough base, that would take about 10 days to develop. And you'd have to take it out every day and play with it and feed it. I mean, it'd be like having a cat. So a pre-ferment is just some of the flour from the recipe, some of the water, and just a pinch of yeast. And you stir that up, cover it up, set it aside, and you let it rot for about 6 to 8 hours. So let's do that. We're going to begin with about 4.23 ounces of einkorn flour. That's about a cup. And we're going to put in a pinch of instant yeast. Active dry yeast you've got to perk in water. The instant yeast you can mix it right in with the flour. So we'll just give that a little blend. And then we'll do our water. We're going to put about 4.59 ounces of water, which is 2/3 to a cup of water. And I'm going to heat that up. You want to use spring water rather than tap water because the chemicals in your tap water are going to mess up your bread chemistry. So mix that in. Just use your fingers. Give it a quick little stir for about 2 or 3 minutes. This is the consistency you're going to want. You can see it's just a little bit thicker than pancake batter. Very sticky, very yucky. So we just clean up the edge of the bowl a little bit. And we'll cover it with some plastic wrap to keep the air away. And cover it with a towel because einkorn flour is light sensitive. So we're going to let that sit for about 6 to 8 hours. While our pre-ferment is busy fermenting, I want to talk a little bit about the pitfalls of working with einkorn flour. Basically, there are 3 things people do wrong when working with this flour. Number 1, they tend to overmix or overwork the dough. So what you're going to want to do is mix it by hand. Don't use a machine. Don't be afraid to get your fingers in it right up to your elbows. Second thing people tend to do is add too much flour while they're working the dough. Einkorn flour is really sticky, so the tendency is to add flour by the handful while you're working this dough until it feels right. Well, with einkorn flour, if it feels right, it's wrong. You've added too much. And the third thing people tend to do is overproof the dough on the final rise. We're also used to letting our yeast doughs raise until they're double in size, but with einkorn flour, you only want to let it raise 1.5 times its size. If you let it rise too much, your loaf is going to collapse in the oven. Okay, our pre-ferment has been sitting here for 8 hours. This is what it will look like. You can see the holes, and you can see it's still fluid, sticky, but that's what it looks like. Now we're going to add our liquid ingredients directly to the pre-ferment. We're going to use a teaspoon of lemon juice for some acid. You could use white vinegar, a couple of tablespoons of olive oil, or you could use coconut oil, and this is a 1/4 cup of pure maple syrup, or you could use honey. Next, our einkorn flour, 16.9 ounces of einkorn flour, approximately 4 cups. And it's a good idea with einkorn flour because it has a tendency to clump up. It's a good idea to sift the flour. Actually, sift it a couple times. So we'll run that through, trying to keep it in the bowl. I'll do better on the second run. Okay, let's see what happens. Yep. Well, you get the idea anyway. Okay, quick clean up here. Next, we're going to add some potato flour. You want to use potato flour, not potato starch. And if you can't find this in the bakery aisle of your grocery store, you can get it at this website. Potato flour will add a little bit of lightness to your crumb. And we want about 0.9 ounces of potato flour, about a 1/4 cup. Also, we're going to add some milk powder. I would recommend King Arthur's Baker's Special Dry Milk. This does not have to be reconstituted and scalded before you use it. You can use it right out of the bag, mix it in with your flour. It's also a very fine grind, so it mixes in with your ingredients very well. And we're going to use about a 1/4 cup. Next, some organic sugar. A tablespoon. And then sea salt. 1 teaspoon of sea salt. And half a teaspoon of instant yeast. And then we want to blend those ingredients together. And finally, the water. 10.5 ounces of water, about 1 1/3 cups. And you're going to want to set your microwave to lukewarm. Lukewarm is about 90 to 100 degrees. Check it with a thermometer. That's perfect. So add the dry ingredients to the pre-ferment. Pour in the water. Now I'm going to put a little olive oil on my fingers to keep the batter from sticking to my hands, but it's not going to work. It's going to stick anyway. And here we go. I'm going to do this in real time so that you can see just exactly how little you have to work this dough. We're just going to incorporate the flour. You just mix this up just until all the dry flour is wet. Just take you about 2 or 3 minutes. Now that flour is starting to absorb the moisture. Still a little bit of dry flour in the bottom of the bowl. So we'll work that in. Cleaning the edges a little bit as we go. And you see I have almost a slice of bread on my hands. Very sticky stuff. Now I know what you're thinking, that's never going to make a loaf of bread. You can see how it doesn't hold together, it doesn't do anything you would expect bread to do after you've kneaded it. But believe it or not, this is exactly what you want. So clean the bowl up a little bit. I think I'm going to have to go out in the garage and get an old wire brush that I used to clean some spark plugs to get my fingers clean. See how easy that comes off because I used olive oil? Yeah, right. Okay, I probably should use a fresh piece of plastic wrap to cover this, but I'm being frugal here. I'm going to cover that up and we're going to let that sit for about 15 minutes. And of course, don't forget the towel because you want to protect it from the light. Okay, we've let the 15 minutes pass by. Now, as far as kneading the dough, this is all you're going to do. You're just going to do, well, this is what it's going to look like after it's been sitting 15 minutes. So it's just starting to come together, but it's still very sticky. And we're just going to fold this dough rather than knead it. And we're not going to use any more than a tablespoon or two of flour. Not handfuls, just a tablespoonful. And spread that around a little bit. And we'll get a second tablespoon to have on hand in case we need it. And we'll dump our dough out of the bowl. And sprinkle a little flour on our fingers and a little bit on the top of the dough. And then we're not gonna deflate this, we're just gonna stretch it out a little into a rectangle. And you can see how weak the structure of this dough is at this point. It tears very easily. There's no strength whatsoever. So make a little rectangle, maybe just a little bit bigger. Fold the bottom to the center, fold the left side to the center, fold the top down, fold the right side over, and then we're going to fold that whole thing, all those layers, in half. And that's it. And we're going to cover that and we're going to let it rest for 15 minutes. And then we're going to repeat the same process 2 more times. So our 15 minutes have passed. Might stick to your bench. Scrape it up a little bit there. We can put that right back in the dough. Spread our flour around, and we don't think we need to use any more. We'll just use what we've got there. Stretch this out into a rectangle again. You can see the dough is just starting to get a little bit of strength, a little bit of flexibility, but it will tear very easily at this stage. Fold up to the center, fold left to the center, fold top down, fold right side over, and then the hard one, fold the whole thing in half. And I think there's still enough flour there. Okay, cover that up, and we'll come back in 15 minutes and do that one more time. Let's get another tablespoon of flour. So we've used, I think, like 5 tablespoons of flour altogether. And you can see now we're starting to get some elasticity to our dough. You know, it's actually starting to take on a little bit of resemble a little bit like a loaf of bread. Fold up, fold over, fold down, fold over, and then the hard one, fold the whole thing in half. And just kind of shape that into a ball. Okay. A little bit of olive oil to coat our bowl so the dough doesn't stick. And that's probably a little too much. Okay. Roll your dough around in the bowl so it gets coated with the olive oil on all sides. And there's that used piece of plastic wrap again. You should really use a fresh piece each time to get a good seal. Seal it from the air. Cover it with a towel. And we're going to let that sit for 3 to 5 hours. So when you come back, this is what it will look like. Not quite as sticky as it was before. Now I would recommend a bowl like this. You can use any bowl you want, but this will put a nice fancy design on your loaf. Some pan spray. I use olive oil pan spray, and then you want to sprinkle some flour, any kind of flour you want. I'm using dark rye, but you want to coat that basket pretty well with oil and water, or flour, because you don't want your loaf sticking when you dump it out of there. Okay, we're gonna bring this out on the table. We don't want to deflate the dough. Just let it fall out of the bowl. And we're going to use our scraper to just kind of round it up. And notice we didn't flour the bench this time because we want that dough to stick to the bench as we're working underneath it with the scraper. As we push it around on the bench, it's actually tightening the skin around the ball of that dough. And if you don't have a bench scraper like that, you can go down to your local hardware store and pick up a drywall knife. It works just as well. But each time you push underneath that, it tightens the skin around the ball of the dough. And then just put it in the bowl with the good side down. A little spray to keep your plastic wrap from sticking. And there's that used piece of plastic wrap again. We will let that raise for about half hour to 45 minutes. This is where you want to watch that it only raises to 1.5 times its size. Now, here's a piece of equipment you can't do without if you want to make good einkorn bread. A cast iron Dutch oven. This is what's going to create the steam action that's needed in your oven to give your loaf that nice oven spring. So we're going to preheat that to 425 degrees. That's a limitation of my particular Dutch oven. You may be able to preheat it to 500. That would be better yet. So this has been setting for 45 minutes. It's raised 1.5 times its size. So very carefully, we're going to dump that out on this piece of parchment paper. Oops, missed. That's going to be a problem. Maybe we can fix that. Okay, you want to cut no more than 3 slots. I'm making the sign of Zorro. Let's see if we can correct our mistake here. Yeah. All right, I think we saved it. Here's our steaming hot Dutch oven. We're going to lift that loaf, parchment paper and all, and drop it right in the bowl. Quickly cover it back up and right back in to the oven. You're going to turn the temperature down on your oven to 400 degrees and leave it in there for 40 to 45 minutes. Oh boy, can you smell that? It's a good idea to take your bread's temperature, see if it's thick. You want the internal temperature to be about 200 degrees. Look at that. And now comes the hardest part of all. You have to let that sit for 1 solid hour before you cut into it. Good luck. I'll leave you with one final thought.